Hello and welcome to Coffee with Dr. ℂ𝐸𝐼𝐒. I'm Dr. ℂ𝐸𝐸. I'm so glad you're here with me today, and my goal today is to talk about some mental health related issues and of course attempt to end some of the stigma surrounding them. So previously I was sharing about my sugar addiction. No, it's not that I enjoy my sweets, which I do enjoy my sweets, but cannot enjoy my sweets. They don't love me back. So previously I talked about the fact that there's very little research out there to support it, but what research is out there is very compelling, and it's very obvious that this addiction is something real. We also talked about the Yale Food Addiction Scale and how it was created to mirror all other addictions. And so last time I talked about loss of control, or trying to quit but being unsuccessful, large amounts of time, spent on trying to find this, addiction, so for me, I would spend insane amounts of time trying to find ways to get the sugar, but then also hide it because, I have diabetes. Why? People can't see me having it. So there was a lot of secrecy involved in it. And then, another component that goes towards qualifying as an addiction is that important events are given up. So, and I wouldn't say that, I wanted to go to my friend's house, but I chose not to go because I couldn't get my sugar fix on, right? However, there are people with addictions who do that type of stuff. I think that how it showed up mostly for me was that within this spending lots of time, I was worried that if I did this or that, then when would I be able to have a treat, right? And so that was an issue. I will say that there weren't many, but there was a few times where I was like, okay, this event is just going to be nonstop sweets. I can't put myself in that situation. And I'm much more of an introvert anyhow, so they both played a role in saying, okay, maybe I'm not going to go to this networking event that's going to be an ice cream social, right? Because the idea of going to that and not having a bowl of ice cream seemed unfathomable. But, I also knew that if I had that one bowl of ice cream, that I would then be kind of obsessive about it. So while that wasn't a big thing for me, I know it's a huge thing for a lot of other people. The other thing that I found with other types of addictions is that often you might get too sick or too hungover, and then you don't perhaps do some of the things that you would want to do. So I did have a little of that where maybe I overindulged the next day, had a headache, didn't feel well, upset stomach, and so the lethargy just made it much harder to be as active as I wanted to. But it wasn't like I missed out on somebody's birthday or anything like that, but that is a real possibility. I think the one that I struggle with the most, even today, is that I continue to use despite the fact that I know it was causing problems. So long time, doing really well, my sugars were in line, and then I don't want to blame it on the pandemic. I think it would have happened anyhow. That's how cycles are. We all go through these cycles. But the world shut down and access to your doctors was very limited, and it was more difficult to do my normal every 3 months check for diabetes and all that other stuff. And no one was proud of me to go in. And so basically what ended up happening was through a series of things, I actually stopped taking my diabetes medicine. I started eating sugars like nobody's business. I refused to monitor my glucose. And then finally, towards the end of 2020, I realized that I was systematically killing myself. And while I didn't know my numbers then, I suspect they were insane. And so I finally decided that I was going to change. I also realized a couple different things. The addiction aspect is where we can't control our intake or our behaviors, right? But I'm a firm believer that these addictions come up because we're trying to cope with or manage something, right? It's a crappy way to cope with it, right? And over the course of time, I started to see a pattern with my clients of ADHD, and not so much the hyperactive components, but the inattention components, really impacting them and their depression. And the more we worked together with this, and then they worked with their psychiatrist, and then there was this collaboration where these folks were now being diagnosed and treated for this, I started to realize, like, well, wait a second. The patterns we're talking about here, many of those are showing up in my own life. So through my own exploration, I started to think about, like, okay, I didn't feel like I was depressed per se. Like, I was depressed in that this lower mood was created because of this addiction, but I didn't, and I still don't believe that I was depressed and therefore took part in the addiction. I think the addiction created the lower mood. But what I did notice as I was doing this research, that there were certain times of day where it was so much harder for me to focus. And so what I did was I'd pop a candy bar in my mouth. I get a little sugar high. That little boost of sugar was good enough for me to be able to then move on. And so that's when I went to a psychiatrist and I laid out the whole thing, and I laid out my history, and I said, I probably have had inattention issues my entire life, right? Like this, it was almost like this, bell went off, and I was like, oh my gosh, here it is. And so then I decided that at the stroke of midnight, as we went from 2020 to 2021, that I was going to stop using. I set my sobriety clock for that time, and yes, I call it sobriety clock. And so between now using Vyvanse, which helps with my ADD, and then the binge and compulsive eating, the sobriety clock going, because I am a control freak, and the idea of having to reset my sobriety clock makes me more anxious than popping in that chocolate candy bar. Or yesterday we were at Dunkin' Donuts and they had this chocolate caramel donut that was just looking quite delish, and I ordered my unsweet iced tea and we went on our merry way. But and so now it's been 2 years and almost pushing on 7 months, and yeah, I know that because it's really important. And so and so the other criteria here are, you build up a tolerance, you need more and more, that if you stop, there's withdrawal symptoms, and as I've been indicating here, there's clinical implications or impairments to one's mental health, right? And so even though sugar is not something that people see readily as an addiction, in fact, a lot of people say, well, it's just poor willpower. I could say the same for all sorts of things, but we all know that that's not really the right way to look at it. And so thankfully, there's a few other people who realize that food, in my case sugar, can be an addiction, and they were able to very logically, through research, show that that's the case. Again, if you're struggling with anything remotely like this, get help. Let somebody help talk you through it, because there's no reason why you have to live with this. I will also say that as long as you keep these things secret, they will continue to fester, and it will never get better. But as soon as you bring them out into the light, their power diminishes substantially, and you can see huge changes. So remember, you can change your thoughts, discover your potential, and transform your life by focusing on your overall well-being. So until next time, keep working on being you and fabulous.